Okay, here we have our package with one of the two panels that are necessary to make the big giant 8-foot tart. We'll take that out of the package and then we'll unroll it. Now this unrolls to about 10 feet, 10.5 feet, and the space I have here is not quite large enough to handle all that, but we'll still give you an idea of what's involved. Now I actually prefer to work in the other direction, so I'm going to turn it around. You see we have quite a long piece here to work with. Now in order to get this all fit in the package, we have it folded in half, so we'll open it up. And we'll go through and do that along the full length of our heart. Drag it through here, you can just get a sense of how big this thing really is. So you can see it's have a pretty big operation here. Along the end here, you'll see it's a straight piece of material, and there are these little zigzags here before you get to the little heart-shaped arrowheads. So what I want to do is take a closer look and give you an idea of exactly what we're dealing with. These are carrier tabs that are extra. They're for transportation, for moving it around, for manufacturing. You don't really need them. In fact, they're in the way for producing a real heart. And let's zoom in for an even closer look. You notice that right here there's a really tiny little connector, and we're going to break that. Usually it just takes just a simple press down with one hand and pull with the other, and it just pops right loose. You want to do that all along this whole straight edge here. So we'll come and just pull these loose. And one of them, the long one there, goes all the way down to right here. So we've got 2 or 3 of these. We'll pop these loose as well. And then we can just take this extra piece and throw it out of the way. In similar fashion, we have here a connector that is also, it'd be in the way later on. It's not much of a problem right now, but it will be later on, so we'll break that loose as well. And now we have all of the connector tabs, or carrier tabs we call these, for carrying the material around, out of the way on this end. For the next step, we want to stretch this open, both just to limber it up, make sure nothing is tight in there. Sometimes these will stick. Most of the ones I think you have I've already popped loose, but what we're doing is just stretching a little bit. That stretches the openings to make it easier to load the balloons later, and again make sure that we don't have any places that are stuck together that we don't want together. So we can do this all along, and we'll do it along the full length of the whole product. Now it's best if you open it so that it does a stair-step routine. It's one layer here and drops down, comes out and drops down. If you get it twisted, it's not a huge problem, but if you can keep it straight so it's like a stair-step all the way down, like a waterfall, then it'll be easier to deal with later on. There you have the idea. Now in the center of this, along this center strip, you'll notice that we have some staples in there. That's the reinforcement. It's really not necessary, but I want to reinforce it, make it easier for you to deal with it. The back side of those, you'll notice that like most staples, they curl under. With them curled under that way, there should not be any problem with it popping balloons, but you could wrap that with just a little clear tape if you want to reinforce it and be a little safer about it having a problem with your balloons. Hey, we're going to continue along, do the whole thing this way, then we'll be able to spread it out in a larger fashion here to take a look at how big this thing really is when you start. Even though this started out at 10.5 feet over the full length, then when we open it up this way, it's going to shorten it so that this that was only a foot or so wide will go up to 8 feet. That length that was 10.5 or so will shrink down to about 8 feet. Let me get it laid out for you and we'll start loading a few balloons. Now, you're going to need to test the sizing on the balloons that you use, but what I'd recommend to start out with is to inflate the balloons to 8 inches in diameter. But that's 8 inches after it's been squeezed, and you go to measure it through the hole at 8 inches. If you measure at 8 inches when it's like this, then what will happen is the balloon will be too long when you go to put it through the hole because it's narrow here and longer. So if you get it 8 inches after it's been squeezed, or set your machine to that size once you figure out exactly what it is, then that should work for you. If you're set up for blowing just one balloon at a time, then you can inflate the balloon and tie it, collect all of those, and then tie them together. When you do, if you do it that style, actually you can get one. The next one you don't have to have tied it. You can take and, well, I usually like to roll it once and roll it twice and tie the balloons very close together. Then, if you want it very neat, you can tie it and cut these off, but ordinarily that won't be a problem, especially loading the balloon as we're going to from the inside of the heart. If you want to be a little neater in between, you can take this knot and tie it one more time, but just leave it, won't pull it, so it's not tight at all. And then you can just keep adding balloons to make your long string. If you're set to have a machine so that you can blow 2 balloons at the same time, and then you can tie the necks together, then later make another pair and tie the tips together. That's a lot faster when you're tying 2 balloons at once all the way through. Some people with the link balloons worry about the fact that it's tapered on one end, it's not perfectly symmetrical, and therefore you end up with this dot dash kind of pattern. However, since we're putting them in the matrix, that's not an issue. And if you use the quick links, they promote that they're symmetrical, and it wouldn't matter with those anyway. Let me get a few of these together and we'll show you about loading. As you can see here, I have the one edge of the heart laid out, and the rest is hanging over the table. Now in this case I have a carpet on the table, so the matrix catches on it and seems to stay in place pretty well. But other times, particularly if you have a regular plastic or wooden table, the weight of what's hanging over may tend to pull it off the table while you're working, which is not very nice. So sometimes what I'll do is take a piece of tape, you may use duct tape or this clear adhesive tape, clear packaging tape, and just tape it down in place. Sometimes that's sufficient to hold it for you. Other times what I really prefer to use are clamps, and clamp that to the table. That way I'm sure that it's not going to get away while I'm working on it. Now the tape doesn't hold as well on the carpet as it does on the table, but you get the idea. Now I'll show you in detail a little closer in a few minutes, but first I just want to show you the idea of what you're trying to do with a string of these. The first one, you'll take the tip of the balloon and put it right against that first strap. Now I'm not going to start at the very bottom hole. You can start wherever is convenient for you. I do like to start at the point, and I like to start with the second opening here. You'll take it. Now if you just roll it, it's going to be too big to go in there for sure. So if you push down the table, however, squeeze in with your hand, so you're squeezing in on this thing, and then push down at the same time, then you can roll it in place. All right, if it gives you a hard time, what you can do is reach around the sides and pull it up on the sides, sort of like you're pulling your trousers up on the sides to get it in place. And make sure that the tail is stuck in place and the neck of the balloon is where they're tied together is right against the strap. Now the first balloon and the first row are the most difficult. After that it gets a little easier. I'll show you the difference in just a minute. And this is working fairly well for me here. These balloons seem especially large for these holes. However, with the link balloons, they're very soft. The Qualitex balloons, I haven't had a chance to play with them yet, but they're normally a little stiffer and therefore a little more awkward to get in. If you inflate the balloons a little smaller than this 8 inches in diameter, they'll be easier to load, but they won't be quite as tight and a pattern for how it looks on the outside. If you put it so that the balloons are evenly loaded in the holes, half on the bottom, half on the top, then they should be fairly flat. But if anything, you want to push them through too far. Now if you do a lot of that, you'll see it really curves on you. It makes it awkward to deal with. Later we'll want that to curve because that'll puff out the balloon, puff out the heart, and that's what we want. But for the moment it'll be a little easier to deal with if they're almost exactly equal and it comes out to a fairly straight line. You can see it's already trying to pull off the table for me. Let me lift that back up and put it on, and we'll do the second row. Now again, what I like to do is start with the second opening, because I'm going to add a row along here later of additional balloons. So once we get that first one in, then when you roll it, if you push it against the balloons that are already there, then it gets a little easier and a little faster to load them. And that'll give you the idea of how we get it started. Now I'm going to switch over to using just the 4-foot heart to demonstrate how loading the whole thing and assembling it. The process is pretty much the same, except the big heart here is, it's really 8 times the volume, so it's going to be a big bulky thing to deal with, and a lot more awkward than the little 4-foot heart we'll work with in a few minutes. But if you get some questions along the way, give me a call. I'll be glad to talk to you, or to make a little video clip or some photos to show you how you can deal with it. But this is the main trick, is to get those strings and load them in there. Now you can load one string and just keep going all the way around. Usually, however, I prefer to work on the big flat part and do the hump later, because the hump at the top of the heart is really got all these curving going on and different shapes for the openings, and it's a lot tighter and more difficult to do. So I find it easier to do that after you've had the practice on the bottom and a little more flat part. It's easier that way. Before we move on over to the 4-foot heart, let me give you a closer view of getting this thing started. What we're going to do is take the tail of the balloon and place it right against this spot. Like I say, I'm just skipping this first hole. You may choose to start there if you prefer. We're going to skip it to start here and lay the balloon across there between these two straps. Okay? That's the idea. Now, it's hard to get the first one, so what I like to do is actually turn it so it's flat. Push this right against it so it's flat down on the table. I have the table to press against. Then I'll want to take and lift this and roll this forward. But now that's way too big, so what you have to do is squeeze it in here. See this, squeeze it, and then push down. So we've got to get it between the sides and roll it forward until it goes into place. Now if this slips like this one did in this particular case, I'll just lift it up like you were pulling up your belt on your trousers or something when you get getting dressed, and get it around it. If you make that first balloon a little smaller, it'll be a little easier to get it started. The second one, we have this balloon to push against. So what we're going to do is push against this one and go right over to this next strap, pretty much the same as we were doing before, because now we have a balloon in the air to push against. So I'll roll it down, and I'll squeeze it, press it against the first one, and then roll it into place until so this neck, where knots are tied together, is right against that strap. Then basically we're just going to repeat that same process each time, squeezing it in and rolling it into place. And actually this technique I was doing right then is one that often works. That is, if you take and press it against it, pull this corner and roll it into place just sideways, that seems to work very well, and later when you're doing lots of them, it's really fast. That's the basic idea, and see, this is curling, so I'm going to adjust it to help keep it flat to get things started. Later we'll want it to curve, and we may press the balloons through to help that happen, to make the heart puff out.